Keep Our Republic is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Since the spring of 2020, we've been doing our part to help keep our republic. We do it through hyper-localized civic education. We talk with Americans through town halls, legal seminars, media briefings, and other events. We know a lot of Americans have a lot of questions right now about how our democracy really works. Questions like, what actually happens behind the scenes on election night, and just what is the power of the federal courts? That's why we're talking directly to election officials and judges from across the country. Together, we can help answer some of those questions. Welcome back, everyone, to Keepers of Our Republic. My name is Brooke. This is a weekly podcast where we're talking with election officials and retired judges about supporting our democratic institutions and the rule of law. Today, I'm sitting down with former Federal Judge Lee Yeakel about the effect that the increase in violence and violent rhetoric is having towards members of the judiciary, is having on the legal system, and having a conversation about the role that partisanship can play in judicial rulings, especially at the district court level. Welcome, Judge, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Of course, what I forgot to mention there is Judge Yeakel is also a member, as so many of our guests are, of the Article 3 Coalition here at Keep Our Republic. Of course, you have a long and impressive bio that precedes joining Keep Our Republic here. So I'm going to go through that real quickly for our listeners. You graduated with your JD from the University of Texas School of Law, where you entered private practice in Austin before joining the bench as judge for the District Court of the Western District of Texas. You were appointed by President Bush in 2003 and served on the bench until your retirement from the court in 2023, where you have returned to private practice as senior counsel. And you get to do a number of things now back as a private citizen, and among them is work with us at Keep Our Republic, talking on behalf of former federal judges and all that that entails. So thank you so much for your many years of service, and thanks again for joining us here. Did I get that all? Did I butcher anything, or did I get it all right?
You did not. That was just wonderful. Thank you.
Perfect. It's great to hear your life's work summed up in 30 seconds or less, right? So before we jump into some of the topics today, I'm interested in hearing what drew you to joining Keep Our Republic and the Article 3 Coalition after you left the bench.
Well, I left the bench on May the 1st of 2023. And the problems that we're having now that we're going to talk about were just beginning to bubble a little bit. They weren't anywhere where they were now. And as you said, I'm senior counsel. I'm with the firm of King and Spalding. It's a part-time job. And so I get to do a lot of outside things as well as the work I do for the firm. And I actually heard about the Article 3 Coalition because I'd read a little blurb about it and contacted a district judge that I had known actually through the Uniform Law Commission that I was involved with, and said, what is this? And he explained it to me, and I said, well, I would love to join it. And so he got my name to Keep Our Republic in the Article 3 Coalition, and I was contacted. And when I heard it out, I was really happy to get involved because if the system is working the way it should work, active judges have no business speaking about what's going on politically and governmentally. Judges, I always felt this way when I was a judge, speak through our decisions. We don't speak outside of that. And the third branch of government is not a policy-making branch of government. We look at the law. We don't look at politics.
So let's talk about some of those issues you alluded to. You said, your decision to leave the bench in 2023 was in part at least inspired by, wanting to speak out on some of the things that you saw starting to fester and that we're obviously seeing a much bigger magnitude these days as we launch into 2026. What are some of the things that you see that are most concerning, most pressing to the federal judiciary?
Well, the rhetoric that some of our appointed and elected officials take toward judges who make rulings that they don't agree with. That just should not be. You can disagree with the judge's ruling, and you can disagree with what an appellate judge or an appellate court does with that ruling, and you can disagree with what the Supreme Court does with it. But the judges rule on the law. We read the law in this country, and we get it from two places, primarily in federal court, the Constitution and the statutes that are passed by Congress. And judges should not be threatened because of the rulings they make. It is fine to disagree with the judge. I used to say all the time, because you always, at the trial court level, have a plaintiff and a defendant, that if I, on my best days, I only batted 50%. There was always somebody that disagreed with the way I ruled. You seldom had, if ever, had both parties leave your courtroom agreeing with what you did. So your hope is they understood what your ruling was, and they felt they had a fair opportunity to present their positions to the court. But then when the court ruled, that was the ruling unless overturned by appeal, because that's the way we've chosen to solve our problems other than gunfights in the street.
And what, so we've heard this from a number of guests, that it's not just violence on a personal level towards judges that's concerning, although that is, of course, deeply, deeply concerning. We've seen a number of incidents of literal violence against former sitting judges. But this idea that the rhetoric actually erodes public trust in general of the judicial system, and this idea that we have a functional, nonpartisan, non-political third branch of government.
A lot of people don't agree that we have that type, because, and I will put the finger on the media here a little bit, because for a long, long time, at least since Watergate, the media has effectively treated the judicial branch as if it were just another political branch of government. For instance, I don't think I ever read an account of anything I did when I was a federal judge, or heard an account of it, that didn't start out George W. Bush appointee Lee Yeakel, or Lee Yeakel, an appointee by President George W. Bush. The same is true of my colleagues who were appointed by Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. And that just tees it up in the minds of the public that you should be ruling consistently with the political beliefs of the person that appointed you, which couldn't be farther from the truth. Yes, there's a political path to how you get to the bench, because it's got to go through the executive branch and then the legislative branch for senatorial confirmation. But that's all it is, and all it should be is the way you get on the bench. Once you get on the bench, you should forget any political allegiances that you ever had.
One thing I haven't had a chance to talk about with any of my guests yet is their appointment process, the interviews, the conversations that happen before your nomination is confirmed by the Senate. Can you kind of talk us through what that experience was like for you? As you said, you were a W. Bush appointee. How much do you think politics played a role, if any, in your nomination?
Well, it plays a role because that's really what gets it started.
Yeah.
And I can't speak for the 100 United States senators that vote to confirm, but I'm sure they have some considerations to that. But when I went to it, and I went to it in 2003, and it was, I'll quote a line first President Bush said in a speech one time, and I can't remember the context, when he called a time a kinder, gentler time. Well, politically, it was definitely a kinder, gentler time in 2003. And the way I came on this, I had gone on the state court bench. I was on an appellate bench here. And in 2002, as we were getting ready to go into 2003, there were some vacancies on the federal court in the Western District of Texas, which is where I live, in Austin, that were going to be filled in 2003. And I was encouraged to apply for one of them. And so I called both our two senators at the time when I first started thinking about it were Senator Phil Gramm, who was not running for reelection in November of 2002, and then Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison, and found out from them what the procedure was in Texas, because it was a long time custom. It's not so much true necessarily today because of change, but forever, and you won't find it in the Constitution anywhere, the district court level started at the senators in your state with the senators, and they made a recommendation to the president. Unless there was a compelling reason for the president not to follow that, the president took the advice of his or her state senators on what to do. And so I found out that our senators had a screening committee, and that we were to fill out a little form that either senator had, and then the screening committee would determine who they were going to interview. And so I presume there was some cut before you got to the screening committee, but I don't know when it was. So the first thing that really happened to me was right after the first of the year into 2003, the screening committee met. And that by then, Senator Graham had left office, and Senator Cornyn, who's currently one of our U.S. senators, was there. And the committee was appointed. It had a large number of really good lawyers from around the state, and it included previous appointments to that committee. The committee had really been going on since John Tower, a Republican, and Lloyd Benson, a Democrat, were our two senators in Texas. So it was mixed, even though we had two Republican senators when I was going through. It was mixed with Democrats and Republicans then. And it was a large number. And it was, I think it was, I recall it was a 1 hour interview. And they asked you a lot of questions, went into your background, asked you about what you had done. I thought it was very professionally done. And then they sent in, they ranked us, I understand, and sent us our names and the committee ranking about how they ranked us to the two senators. Now, the senators were not required to take the first one off the list or any of them off the list. And they could interview a lot on their own or very few on their own. And the senators also at that time made a comment on the division in the district to appoint you to, and because the Western District we have district courthouses in Waco and Austin and San Antonio and Midland, El Paso, and Del Rio, where we sit full time. We also have a courthouse in Alpine and a courthouse in Pecos, but we don't have full-time judges that sit there. And so they recommended me, which was a great thing. It was the died and gone to heaven position of Austin, because it was where I was already a judge and it's where I practiced my entire legal career. And they selected me and one other person to interview. And so, like a week after this committee hearing, I was in Washington to be interviewed by the senators. And the first interview was in the morning, the second interview was in the afternoon. In the morning, it was Senator Cornyn, who was a brand new senator, had just come to Washington right then. And it was really kind of fun because he came out and greeted me, and he he said, "Come on in, let's chit chat." And I thought, well, this is, he's not taking this nearly as seriously as I'm taking it. Well, he explained to me that at the time that he was a new senator, and he had learned that even though all senators were created equal, junior senators were less equal to senior senators. And Senator Hutchinson, who had been there for 10 years, had made it pretty clear to him these were going to be her appointments. They were going to be her selections, her recommendations as president. So we chatted, and it was one of those bitterly cold January Washington days. And I think my interview with him, it was a 30-minute interview, was over at noon, and my interview with Senator Hutchinson wasn't until 4. So I had to walk around in the cold for 4 hours with a stomach acid trying to eat its way out. Said, okay, the rest of your life comes down to one 30-minute interview. And that's the way it is. So then I interviewed. No
pressure. Yeah.
Interviewed with her. It was a much different interview than it was with Senator Cornyn. She was very impressive with her interview. She had, as you can gather, you file papers with them, with your background and everything in it. And she had those papers in front of her, and she asked me questions for the full 30 minutes. And not a one of them was answered by anything she had sitting in her lap. It was a really, really good interview, because as a lawyer and then a judge for the 5 years I'd been a judge, you spend your life sizing up people. And I remember she was inscrutable. I couldn't read her. So when I left that interview, I thought I'd done as good a job as I could do, but I didn't come away from there thinking I had an idea of whether it was me or the other person she was going to recommend.
What do you recall as you were going through that interview process to become a federal judge, do you recall any of those interview questions?
At the committee, the last question I got asked was by a lawyer, do you think if you become a federal judge, you will change? And the other group laughed, and I kind of looked like I don't understand the joke. I said, well, that's his judge-itis statement. And I later learned when I went on the bench is there's a disease called black robe fever, that you become a federal judge and suddenly you're appointed for life, which is a big time thing. You're making decisions that generally stand, and that some people have it go to their head. And so that was that lawyer's pet question, do you think you'll change? And my answer to it was, well, I don't think so, but I've been a judge for 5 years, and I'm happy for you to discuss that with people who appeared before me, because I try not to do that, not to let it go to my head. But we never see ourselves as other people see us. And so there was that one. There's always the rumor out there, and it will never stop, that whether it's a Democrat president that's going to appoint you or a Republican president, there's a litmus test that, you've got to pass, you've got to agree to make certain rulings. I can tell you there certainly wasn't one with mine, Senator Hutchinson, rather, who I said did most of the questioning, because Senator Cornyn, of what he had said, it was pretty clear to me from her questions that she was trying to get a handle on what my process would be like in going about making a decision, how I would study things and reason through it. And if she was comfortable with the process I was going to use, that whatever her thought might be on what's in front of me, she was willing to leave it alone. She never asked me a question. And the hot issues of the day in 2003, which were pending before the judiciary at the time, were the death penalty, which comes up all the time, about how do you feel about the death penalty, how do you feel about abortion, was a big issue then. And then how do you feel about minority representation in colleges, and how would you deal with minorities? Well, there's never a question asked about how I would rule on anything like that. It was, well, if you got a particularly difficult case in, what would you do here? Let's suppose you had a death penalty case. How would you go about deciding what to do with it? And I was pretty impressed with that process, because it just seemed to me She never asked me a question how I would rule.
Yeah. More
It
about
was,
your process as opposed to your direct
I
political
got the
opinion.
impression that she was looking for somebody who could judge impartially and put out of their mind what their personal beliefs might be and rule on the way they saw the law. So it was after that, then I was fortunate enough to have the senators send my name as the recommendation to President Bush, at which time I needed to go to Washington and interview with White House counsel. And White House counsel interviewed me for an hour. It happened to be Al Gonzalez at the time. Uh, there was him, an assistant White House counsel in the room, and a representative lawyer from the Justice Department, from the Office of Policy and Planning in the Justice Department, which would be involved with doing part of my background check. And it was a 1 hour, really, really, I've never been interviewed like that before. They got into everything they could get into about your personal life. Because what he was really looking for was there was anything that was going to embarrass the president if the nomination was made. Again, never a question about how I would rule on anything, but there were some pretty sensitive questions in there. But I thought it was fair. And about every, I don't know, 8 minutes maybe, it's hard to say, White House counsel would stop and say, do you want to add anything to your previous answers or explain anything? So it wasn't like a staccato machine gun thing of trying to put you on the spot. It was a really in-depth personal interview. This is self-serving because obviously I was confirmed and became a federal judge. But I thought it was a very fair process. I thought it was thorough, and I think it needs to be thorough, but I thought it was fair.
What are you hearing? You're retired, but one of the interesting issues today is most judges currently sitting on the bench take very seriously their ethical obligation to not speak out on a lot of issues, on certain issues that could affect perceptions of their impartiality. So, as a former judge, sort of from what you're hearing from your colleagues or what you're seeing in the media, how do you think that this process is changing? Do you think this process is changing? And if so, how, in terms of how much politics is coming into play in the federal judiciary?
I think it is changing, and I can't tell you where we are in the continuum of changing. Not all countries want their judges to remain silent on things.
Mm-hmm.
In other countries, judges are allowed to talk about things. I think it's a better system if we don't, because if you do, it indicates that you've predetermined an issue. Yeah. And we should base our decision solely on what we hear in the courtroom, orally, and what other evidence is received. But I know there's been at least 2 occasions within the last year or 18 months where judges or groups of judges have spoken with the media about what's happening in this country today. They did it anonymously, but I don't think that cures it. I think the judiciary as an institution, active judges, don't have any business commenting on the political situation in the country. But based on what I know about what's happening in other countries, and this is not a law that says you can't comment on things. It's just not a good idea, whether you're a state judge or a federal judge. And it may be that we're in the beginning of seeing a paradigm shift that goes back to what I said earlier about the public has been kind of had it hammered into their head that we're just another political branch of government. And I don't think we have any business talking about as an active judge, any policy making functions at all. I don't think judges have any policymaking functions. That's up to the executive branch and the legislative branch. And then we look at what they do and determine of whether they acted legally. And we put our whole background out of the question. I've had numerous people over my career say, I could never do what you do because I couldn't put that out of my mind. Well, I'm not bragging on me or them or being critical of either one, but you can. Because if you take the job, the presumption to me comes with it, you're going to do it right. And you train yourself to just not let your political or personal beliefs enter into your decision-making process. And I won't say it was easy. The first time I went on the bench, I'd tried lawsuits and appealed lawsuits throughout. And I wasn't young when I went on the bench. I'd been practicing 28 years before I ever went on the bench. And I was amazed at how hard it was to determine the facts of a matter in front of you by going right down the middle of what was in the record, because I'd always represent a party and he always spun the facts a little bit. And it's all right to spin the facts. You can't lie about them, but you can spin them. And it was harder than I ever thought it would be to put the blinders on and go right down the middle, but you can do it and you train yourself to do it. And I honestly think it was better that I was on appellate bench, on a state appellate bench for 5 years before I went into the federal system, where you get these constitutional questions and these honestly heavy questions that I'd already kind of trained myself. Well, not kind of, I had trained myself to not let my personal preferences come in anywhere. Every judge will tell you they've made, rulings that they probably wouldn't have made. They wouldn't have voted the way they ruled if they'd been in the state legislature, for instance.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Judge, I cannot believe I have to say this, but we are running short on time. This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your insight. It's not a topic we have covered before, to really dive in to that process sort of behind the scenes and how perhaps that is a changing process in front of our eyes right now. Thank you so much for all you do for the Article 3 Coalition, for your continued advocacy on behalf of the federal judiciary, and your many years of service. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Well, it was a pleasure speaking with you, and it is a real joy to be in the Article 3 Coalition and be around judges that want to stand up for the judiciary.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks so much, Judge.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, please share it on social media and tell your friends. It's the best way for folks to find out about us. I hope you'll agree that our guest is indeed a keeper of the Republic. If you want to learn more about how you can help keep our Republic, stop on over to our website, keepourrepublic.org.